I remember a friend of mine this time of year was work. He goes to consults at colleges around the country, and I remember talking to him because we were at an event together, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to Saskatchewan
In the
in
winter? Oh
February." I'm
God.
like, I'm like, "You're crazy." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't know. It's where the money is." Good morning, Frode,
Hey,
Good
Frode.
or
afternoon
afternoon.
and morning and everything.
Yeah, good, whatever it is. Day, night,
Yes, indeed.
just good. I need some goodness, at least to express it even.
Yeah, goodness is,
Yeah, there's always goodness. You just got to know where to look for it.
Yeah, because good isn't news.
yes, we
Right.
do need some goodness these days, some good news, goodness.
Yeah. It's just, it's like everything. It's like you only pay attention to the bad stuff because that's going to hurt you, affect you. And
Yeah, but as Nietzsche said, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger.
ah,
Dumbest
uh,
statement ever made, of course. But yeah, fair enough.
hey, hey, Frodo, just before you're inspiring me to do some stuff in 3D. I'm working with Ward Cunningham of the Federated Wiki folks about how to do 3D wikis and his scheme with lineups and pages and some active computation going on across pages. And so, seeing you do your work in visionOS, I'm just trying to do it with basic WebXR to get it kind of portable across, browsers and devices and non-headset worlds. Um, but I'm inspired by some of the stuff you and Ken stuff is kind of neat. So
It's
I got to
interesting.
get myself a decent headset, but uh,
It's
for
really
now, it's just
interesting.
figuring out how you can do text with wiki manipulations and when you can do 3D stuff. It's more about tearing, like almost like tearing tabs off a browser and placing them someplace like bookmarks. So you've got individual words and lines going on. We've got lineups of pages, chunks that need to be referred to and dragged around and, you know, gawked at by leaning in and whatnot. It's
It's really interesting hearing you talk about that today. Let me just, because
yeah,
one of the key things today to talk about, I don't know who's going to be here. The weather and work is keeping
yeah,
several people away, but so you're familiar with the visual meta approach, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So just started cleaning up the spatialized visual meta. And the only thing it really is, and Mark was really good at making this very clear today, is the layouts, right? Because the layouts are whatever stuff you have. Hi, Ken. Peter was just beginning with wikis and stuff, and I was just referring to how the spatial stuff is. All it is an ID and XYZ. So if there's wiki stuff there, brilliant. Just like here, we just have two kinds of objects so far. One is a node that is basically a defined concept or glossary term. The other one are citations, which are just a full bibtec. That's it.
All right.
So
I'm
to have
thinking,
a deep dialogue on how wikis can be spatialized with just the XYZ, and of course
yeah,
having
just
them.
here's where that container or that tree of mesh, maybe they're meshes, a 3D meshes, and it's like a tree of things. That would be the top level one for, say, a wiki that has a whole bunch of pages. And the nice thing about Ward's thing, it's like you can have a lineup of pages, say, here's a structured form through the wiki links with 5 pages that have the important things I want you to know. You can bookmark those and share those real easy. Well, here you can just make kind of like a footnote reference. It kind of ties into what you're doing pretty easily without any kind of direct programming. It's just basically, dereference a link and then how your browser, how your um, environment decomposes it and leads you to it. Um,
100%.
so I'm interested in seeing that going from linear documents to some of the network, the more graphical, or excuse me, the wiki things that have a lot more complicated relationships than document citation kind of stuff.
So I started reading this one, as I'm sure you're all familiar with,
Oh wow.
Walter Ong. It's a terrible read.
I have the older one.
Oh, fantastic. It's just terrible because there's inspirations in every sentence. It makes it really hard to get through it because there's always something. But so next week, we're going to start talking about a very specific thing, a conference in XR, as we briefly touched upon. And today, related to what you're talking about, Peter, is how to display citations in XR. So I have just a couple of slides to show you guys. I don't know who's coming today. Mark couldn't make it, and Peter Wasilko is snowed in. So I'll just go through it. It's really brief.
The effect is cyber connections? I don't know, maybe cables out for him or something.
Yeah, I think there's multiple issues. So really briefly then, to remind us of the top level topic here is augmented dialogue. It's not necessarily academic dialogue. And as you all know very well, I have the author map. I'm also building at some point an app called Knowledge Space, also native to visionOS. The fact that I own the name is kind of fun. The reason for this is that the author is all mine, which is not great for openness. Knowledge Space only will work on imported spatial data. So it's a test app just to see that it does work, and hopefully together with other people we'll figure out what that means. Spatialized visual meta, there you go, so exciting. So yeah, you're behind the text. Today's question is really quite obvious, but I really hope we can have some fun with it. So we have nodes in space, and we have as glossary terms or defined concepts, right? That's one thing we have. Here's a piece of thing. You do something, it opens up, and there's something about it, right? There's also quotes and citations. And the last week up skiing in the mountains of Norway, this has really been weighing on my mind. If you have a quote, what is that in this world? Right? To have both quotes and citations, they're not the same thing. Citation is basically, here's the document, author and title, right? A quote is that plus a bit of text, obviously. So the things we need to do design-wise to figure out what to show when closed and what to show when open. So we want to be able to show annotations, notes, quotes, abstracts from the thing. It's really simple if we only have one, but the question is which one to show, because the space gets really messy. So we also need to look at what interactions, like changing the views, looking at connections. Opening the source document becomes yet another interesting issue. If you have a quote, does that contain the source in this world? Or does it just have a link to it? That's partly because of the data issues. To be able to like it and hide it, annotate and edit, right? So this is the last of two slides. This is not, I'm not trying to bore you to pieces with it. But the notion is very, very simple. When it's closed, you show the beginning of the quote, maybe just 3 lines. I'll just wait here for Astral. Hi, Astral. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll just go ahead because this is really simple. The notion at the moment that I'm wondering your opinion and to discuss is when you have a node with a quote or an abstract, we have to decide on some arbitrary amount of data to show. So what I'm proposing to you guys is something as simple as 3 lines, not too wide, author title underneath. And then the key becomes there on the right. When you go, well, if you open, you get the whole thing, you can scroll. But if you go to the edit, that's where you can choose whether you want to see the quote, the abstract, or whatever it is in the document. And one final little thing before we have fun and talk is, it might be fun if these little nodes have different depths depending on how much text they contain. To have, so you can instantly see, is it a little note or are we quoting a big book or something? Any thoughts before I close the slides?
I mean, I think the key thing here is breadcrumbs. It's how do we show the breadcrumbs? Uh, and I mean, to me, I think you could maybe have a rollover. Maybe you have different um, blocks at the bottom of each one that has maybe a different, maybe color code it and say, okay, red is annotation, blue is citation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that if you roll over it, it'll pop up and it'll say, you want to, it'll say annotation and you click on it, it will pop open that window. That way you can get the whole thing in one node relatively quickly. But then as a layered thing, you could also display the connections because
So
that's what citations are. They're
when you say
breadcrumbs.
rollover, you mean kind of glance over, right? Or point over.
Yeah.
Or,
I
yeah.
mean, ideally, you get it so that the user sort of internalizes those and remembers, okay, red is this and blue and green. Just like on an Apple screen, the red, blue, the red, yellow, green dots at the top left, although I have to say they don't always work as consistently as I'd like them to. But
Mm.
um, I can say that because Brundle's not here yet. But yeah, something like that where you have these things along the bottom of every window, and then you could basically shift views pretty easily. Because if it's internal to the one document itself, then that's the parts you need. Now, how do you get the connections to other documents? I think that's a different conversation.
Yeah. Rob and Astral, just wanted to say we're talking now about having a quote in space. How much to show, what aspects to show, and that kind of stuff. Part of the
Got
problem
it.
we're having with developing native visionOS is that they can't really contain controls in the nodes, which is very weird, and I'm sure Ken has a much better idea.
No, no, I don't. I just have an opinion. So, if I were doing this research in the old-fashioned way, and I was going through a library and looking through things, and I had the means to hire an assistant, my assistant would know why I'm doing something. Am I trying to do research? Am I working on a case? Am I a scientist trying to investigate something? Am I just doing this for pleasure? And my assistant would say, "Oh, I need to bring you this book now, or let me just give you a summary of this, or here's some other references you might like, like a person does, who kind of knows me." So in our lab, as we are playing around with exploring text and other things in mixed reality, we frame that in terms of is it possible for me to make use of or give prompts to an AI which will act as an assistant that will be able to infer my current context and therefore give me the information I really want based on why I'm doing this right now in this instance, which is not something that's built into the tree structure that you're looking at. It's built into your browsing history, your preference, what day it is, what you had for breakfast, all sorts of things. So I don't know that we would find the answer entirely in this day and age when we are rapidly advancing in AI, just in creating something inherent in a sort of a 1970s Xerox PARC pull-down menu sort of way of looking at the world.
I do agree. And when I started working on this very, very simple spatial format, I gave all kinds of things to Claude, and it did partly what you're talking about. It analyzed my sample data and said these things are clustered together, those things are clustered together. It's not exactly what you said at all, but it did look at the space as having meaning in order to help generate further things. And I think that's really, really important. I'm trying to keep this slightly separate from AI because certainly AI is very, very important. I use Claude for all kinds of things. But in the same way that Walter Ong and others write about how humans' ability to think changed with writing, even with relatively low levels of literacy, it turned out, I'm wondering how our thinking will change with spatial literacy. So the act of moving stuff around, so far, I don't find it very useful, but I think that's early days. So I'm wondering, in addition to what might be brought in by AI, what manual operations are actually useful. I think that's really, really tricky. You know, how is something revealed, how you change it, and so on. So yes, AI, but also semi-manual. Tom.
Yeah, I want to second that. I think I would sort of fuse what I'm saying with what Ken's saying. There's times when you want that assistant. There are also times when you don't want that assistant. You want them to go away and leave you alone so you can think, right? So, if you had a couple, and maybe you don't have 5 buttons, maybe you only have two. I think the citation page, the bibliography, or whatever you want to call it, should be the gateway, just like any citation page in a book would be, should be the gateway to the wider web of conversation. And so, that would all be, you could click on a particular citation and it would give you a web of connections back to that citation and say, look, it's cited in 5 different places here, blah, blah, blah. And they're talking about this subject or something like that. And that way you can turn that on and off, and you can toggle that and say, okay, this is something that he just sort of threw in there because he was having to add a citation to get his PhD. Or this is something that's critical to the argument and that I should explore more deeply and read more carefully. That to me is the thing that we are going to have the biggest challenge with AI is direction finding. It's really, it's not, the information's there, it's exploding all over the place, but knowing which path to follow is going to be the real problem. And of course, people with ADD are going to really struggle with that. But there's too many rabbit holes, as I've talked about before. But yeah, that's going to be something. And so, can you use this as a tool to help you zoom in and out on the information? I think that's really the key. And that's where I find, again, AI most useful when I zoom in and out on information. I do broad searches and I do narrow searches on just certain documents and do the same searches and compare them and send responses from one into the other and say, okay, does this agree with this, and so on and so forth. That's really handy from an AI perspective. But I think if you could do that visually, that would be a really cool trick.
Yeah, by the way, you can see the screen, right?
Yep.
In terms of the controls, I just wanted to show you, you've seen some of this, but talking about this. So Ken, this happens to be your quote up front here. And the way that I'm trying to deal with this now is trying to separate context from something else. So all of this stuff is context, which you can ignore. So if I now do select persons, nobody got selected because all the persons are context. If I now do off ignore context, boom, all the persons are selected. So that means that you can have context as passive background and then come into it as you need it. I think that's really, really important. So this is a very short quote. If I open it, it just has a few keywords and Ken and where it was said. The reason for that, if I select it, you can see here, Symposium 25 is when it was said. Select Symposium 25. We can see what was said there, because that has a few other things. So now if we just focus, did I do focus? Then everything that isn't said at the symposium is there. So now I can snap that to the background. And so you see what I'm doing? I'm trying to deal with these bigger things, and it's messy. That's really the point I'm making. Let me just show.
I think you should be able to toggle it.
Yeah, you can. So right now I toggled. Toggle what?
The amount of messiness you want to deal with. Sometimes you want to see the mess.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes you want to see the path.
No, absolutely. That is exactly my whole point. So if I now go to focus, only things that are selected or connected to what's selected appear. So that's exactly what I mean by toggling it. So then I just go show all or defocus, right? So if I look here, a few people, for whatever reason, they're selected. I can see who's a public figure, who's a current participant in our group. Not everyone is. Earlier participants. So that's all fun and relatively obvious, I think, but it gets interesting with all this messiness of these cool quotes, right? So you guys have said really interesting things, but how are we going to go through it? Right? This is a mess. Should these quotes be kind of as a column? Unfortunately, I don't have a way to just select them right now. My programmers are on holiday, which is the worst thing in the world, obviously.
Does visionOS have better organization things? Because I'm playing with Babylon.js and 3JS as I'm doing my work, and I'm saying they got some neat default controls, like throw all these up on a sphere and kind of just the control takes care of positioning, kind of like a linear, stack frame. You got a spherical frame, you got cylindrical frames and stuff like that. I'm not familiar
Apple's
enough with
had Snap
visionOS
to Grid
programming.
forever. I don't know if that translates into visionOS or not.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at visionOS as kind of constraining you in some things. I think that it's certainly cool, but I'm trying to stay away from it because I don't have a visionOS, so I'm WebXR limited or constrained. But there's a lot of cool things out there that you can say, take the citations, throw them up in a linear, going backwards in time, or as a stack frame, like you say, not just lines and text like you got there. It's you say that's a spaghetti mess.
Yeah, I mean the lines appear when you choose to select something, not to arrange it. I don't know if you remember, but there are layouts, like you can instantly select all people and make them a column, space them, sort them. So those things are already there. But in this environment, it's all a virtual cube, well, massive cube, but it's all facing only one direction. Ken?
I agree completely with Peter, both what he said and also what he texted, which is that I've been using Gemini to answer questions. And what I notice is that it doesn't try to create the illusion of being a person, which is very refreshing. It's just a tool. But I am quite aware as I'm using it that it is gathering information from a lot of people who've written a lot of things, organizing them for me and putting them into a nice, neat order that matches my query. And I do feel as though the very question that you were asking about, wow, this is really a mess, how come I can't quite make sense of this, is actually the sort of organizational tasks that these AIs are currently good at. Based on what is my context right now, here's a mess of information. Could you please give me a summary that responds to why I'm looking at this right now? So I don't think, I mean, I have gone through the effort of trying to manually write these things, and they're brittle and they're hard. And it's kind of like, writing a manual program to parse natural speech. You can sort of do it, but then the person who uses it has to be aware that it could break at any moment. And I do think that the big thing about these large language models is that they're very robust and they won't break when we just want them to organize stuff for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should be leaning into that because it's there.
I don't think you know how deep that goes, Ken. Real quick. Sorry, Frode. I had a thing a few weeks ago where I basically asked Gemini to help me sort of prioritize my tasks, and it came up with this whole board I've got it on a whiteboard now, and I used it, and it actually works. And I hate how-to books because they're always kind of reductionist. But this I used for the weekend. I was like, holy crap, I'm actually using this and it's perfect for me. And then I asked it on after I'd used it for a few days, where'd you get this from? Because I figured it had stolen it from some book somewhere and I wanted to read the book, right? And it goes, oh, no. I built this specifically for you. You're interested in visualization and systems thinking and gaming. And I built you a game board that you can use to visualize your system and figure out which thing has the most priority at the moment, which I was like, oh, that's creepy. So you don't know how deep that information gathering goes, is my point. Sorry, Frode.
No, that's fine. And I see Peter has his hand up.
Oh, yeah. I'm mentioning I've been chatting things on the side because that's the way I organize my thoughts when I get a spurious thing happening, and then the text out there hopefully organizes it. The I think we're moving from the point where you do hard-coded links, ahref kind of things, to where, oh, it's going to read the text and you're going to get this AI link, kind of the way Notebook LM kind of produces things that aren't going to be as explicit by the author. I mean, you're going to depend on it to figure out, oh, that's coming from this book, or this writer puts you in that context, and it builds up the citation for you almost. I think the key is you still want to linearize, you still want to author something to say, as a reader trying to make sense of it, I don't want them just wandering around the wiki and wasting hours. I want them to see my point of view. And so you write it up as a document with citations and things. But I'm thinking you have the extra capability of saying, well, go down the rabbit hole, same as the author may have done. Go down the citation, read the original work, do the things an eliminated manuscript does. It's like reading the Torah or something like that. Except you don't have to develop those as manually as you want, except for the fact you want to develop a point of view to say, hey, reader or movie watcher or video watcher, TED Talk watcher, whatever it is, I'm developing something to guide you through my point of view because I think it's important and I want you to see what I see. I'm thinking you're doing a good job of kind of constraining it to what you need for authoring. And I think you should stick to that because there's not really good tools to do what you are already doing, I think. But boiling the ocean is going to, I think I'm trying to boil the ocean sometimes when I'm going through this stuff. Saying, I want a generic wiki that does it. No, I want to do a particular thing.
A particular thing is a really good perspective, Ken.
Right.
Consistent with what Peter said, the tool that I briefly showed last week, where I did my Wikipedia visualizer, actually behind the scenes, it turns the Wikipedia page. It doesn't just stop with the markdown. It turns the page into a hierarchical tree structure where you've got the name, you've got the text, and then you have an array of the same thing recursively, which is what Wikipedia is storing internally. So I build that internally. The reason that I built that little demo was as a precursor to to looking at it in one of these things, all around me. And one of the things that's different from even my little demo and Wikipedia is I don't have any links. When you highlight or click on any text, that's the link. So I'm going back to, and the reason I'm doing that is because I'm thinking forward to, I'm going to have my AI assistant listen to me and decide what am I trying to link to. I'm not going to hardwire that into the document because that's fluid and that's contextual. So what Peter said is actually completely consistent with what I'm prototyping and why I'm doing it.
I think we're moving from Ted Nelson style, like, the links and all that kind of stuff to being, oh, well, this text's just going to naturally flow into the other thing without me having to do ahref, whatnot. I'm thinking there's still a good use for put the annotations on. Well, this section of text, like ahref with a link, is a good way of explicitly capturing that to say, this is what I want to point you to. But you're going to have a bunches of those kind of come up. And you want to guide them to say, don't go to Amazon for this. Go to my version of the book or my annotated version of the wiki or whatever it is. Versus have the AI just go off and choose the most popular one, which is what the AI is going to do. It's going to be this bell curve averaging of words, and the LLMs doing their their statistical kind of finding of what's the source of this word or what to do that. So I think there's the authored aspect of, I want you to go here versus let the AI kind of tell you what it is. And that one will be one of the many things that come out of like Notebook LM finds things that are wonderfully interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. The authored perspective is really important to maintain, while also the flexibility, like Ted said, God of the author and God of the reader. So absolutely. I had a half-page review of Liquid in the New York Times many, many years ago. And because Liquid allows you to select any text in any app and then do 300 different operations, including searches, the entire article was about what a waste that was. You come across the word "the" in the beginning of a piece, and you spend your entire life just chasing down everything. So freedom means different things for different people, clearly. I mean, I'm not anti-AI, but considering the limited, very, very limited resources available for this work, at least until it's much bigger funded, and also the insanely huge investment in AI, I'm really trying to look at more of the manual aspects where the thing is, because I haven't been able to share it with you properly, the toolbar at the bottom changes depending on contextually what you have. And I know that seems like a very backwards way to go because we have gestures, but gestures are still a little brittle in all the systems. So here, like the focus, after a while, I have a large toolbar, ugly as sin. Over the last 2 years with Sloan, I would have been embarrassed to show that. But I do actually hit focus very easily. So boom, everything else is gone. So after a while to do that, I was out in the snow in Norway last week doing it. There's a lot that can be done, and I don't know what the use case is because it keeps changing. And thank you, Peter, for talking about something specific. Because when I analyze our own meetings and I have really interesting sentences, what you guys have said, it gets cluttered so quickly. So maybe that should actually be dropped, and we go back to here are the people, here are the individual concepts and how they get together. I wonder what Ken thinks.
Um, so I want to make an analogy here, Frode, in response to what you just said about the how we position ourselves and what we do in relationship to AI. Um, Even in this day and age, I could build my own car. And if I, focused on building my own car, I could probably even build a car that's street legal if I really want to focus on that. What I'm not going to do, and I'm never going to do, is I'm never going to build the road that car is on. In fact, and not only that, but every decision that I make in making a street legal car is informed by the fact that these things aren't even useful without roads. In 1903, cars were a nuisance. They're illegal most places. They got in the way of the horses. By 1908, cars had replaced horses because of the roads. And so it was just a much better thing because the infrastructure is there. That's the way I'm looking at the AI as the road. I'm not trying to build an AI. I'm not an expert in AI. I'm never going to be an expert in AI. I've got colleagues who are good at that. But I have to be aware, just as we became aware at some point that we're building things through the internet, that whatever I build is going to plug into a large capability that is powering a lot of the world. And I need to not say, oh, well, I'll just have my car pave a road as it goes along, or something like that, because that's not a useful way of thinking about things. So we don't have to put AI into everything we do, but we have to understand where it's going in terms of what we're doing being useful from 2026 going forward. Those are not the same thing.
Oh, 100% agree with you. On the flight on the way over here, as a small example, I had to copy from a PDF into Author some stuff. And of course, copy from PDF is always a mess. So I have a prompt in Author, paste processed. And because it uses Apple Intelligence in addition to ChatGPT, even in the air, it cleaned it up and pasted it for me. So I'm not in any way adverse to AI in many, many places on the pipeline. We have AI copy. I use Claude a lot, and I completely agree with you, Ken, as with the analogy of infrastructure with AI. I mean, that is why I'm doing the visual metaspatial thing, because people like Mark, who has been very kind and sent me very detailed comments, have very deep understanding of these things. However, I don't expect it to be hard coded anymore. I expect there to be some sort of AI involved. So if we have just something that is good enough, that has the data in it, even if it's got the comma in the wrong place, for us to share. I think a plain text spatial format is going to be crucial going forward. And an additional thing, Ken, to your points there is, well, actually to everybody. I was re-inspired because I've almost forgotten about the origins of my tool Liquid. So select text, keyboard shortcut, toolbar. This is stolen from NLS, from Doug. I realized after it was made, because I don't know if you remember, in Doug's system, you would write a command, and if you forget your options, you hit the question mark key, and the screen is full of commands that are legal for that spot, which is phenomenal to help you learn it. So this does the opposite. It loads whatever selected text into a toolbar, and then you have lots of submenus. Search, references, translate, blah, 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 right? And once you learn it, there's keyboard shortcuts. So if you want to look something up in Wikipedia, select text, RW, boom, there it is. Now, I'm reading this incredible book that Andrea recommended. Highly, highly recommend. It's absolutely wonderful. It's so well written, even though it's thick as sin. And I was just thinking, if I had a VR app of the model of the brain, and I'm reading something about the amygdala or whatever, with current infrastructures, these two things are completely separate, which I think is crazy. So what I would really like to see the operating system manufacturers, Apple, Meta, and so on, is to allow one piece of software to do a find command to another. So if the 3D software of the brain I have, if it has a find or a search function, shouldn't any other software be allowed to take amygdala or whatever, search, here's a list of my installed apps, and open it, right? So when you're talking about infrastructures, Ken, the road, I think there are many, many levels on that. And this is something we can never do. It has to be the OS people. But I think we should encourage them to allow for that, because it's using a function that's in the other software. But, it's only if you have a find, let it be allowed from outside, right? Infrastructures matter. And in terms of what this thing does, Peter, your words about specific really rings in my head, because the map in Author, the traditional flat one, doesn't try to do everything in the world. It's very specific. I'm wondering if the spatialized version is overextending itself. But at the same time, considering that maybe next week, next month, we will look at having a conference, maybe that should be a completely new WebXR thing, or maybe it can lend itself to similar display. I don't know. Let me put it this way. Going forward, you guys obviously being core, since you're here, by virtue of being here, what kind of aspect of implementation would you like to discuss? Because, in the beginning of it, I will show what I have as a 10-minute, let's start something. And I really do encourage anybody else to show, like Ken does. And soon I'll be trying to expand the audience a bit. But what are the key things that you really want to discuss and look at?
My impetus, I get knowledge nuggets from everyone here about how to do things. My use cases are different because I'm trying to do all this wiki stuff, and I'm trying to do good degraded work without a headset. In other words, the headset's going to be vastly improved. You have that visceral looking in things and whatnot. That's very different from 2.5D, using a mouse and looking around a 3D environment in a browser with the WebXR or something like that. But so I'm busy trying to figure out how I want to have an experience that a normal user in a browser could use without a headset that works. But hey, you put the headset on, you get this wonderful experience. Or I've done it with the phone. I mean, you can take your phone out and do the XR stuff and walk around with your phone and walk over like you do with your headset, walk over to a page in space. And the phone will do all that without a headset. So I can give people the ability to have my virtual conference room, my project room with all the stuff on the walls, because you used to do that with big whiteboards, a bullpen, and you'd have everything all over the walls. Well, now you can do it virtually, but it's hard to get around that and using a mouse and clicking around. The headset makes it a lot more easy to go one place to the other real quick. Just turn your head. So I'm busy trying to figure out how I want to get that information architecture that works regardless of the 3D, but have it be set up so that the 3D just is much more enhanced for our humans to kind of surf through this mess that the AI is going to generate with all these excess links and all this other wonderful yet confusing datascape that we're surfing.
Thank you, Peter. That's very
So
interesting.
that'd be my kind of goal. I pull away little bits from you guys, and then you're doing an authoring use case with author that's very specific, like writing academic papers, doing citations and stuff, which needs to be done well because you need those. Both to feed the AI model, the AI that's going to trauma and the humans that are going to read that, but also you need those linear stories like telling a movie. You're writing a movie of the knowledge you want to show.
I have thoughts, but Ken first.
Once again, I find myself agreeing with Peter that in our lab, we are actually doing two things in parallel for a very specific reason. We are looking at, okay, I put on my headset and there's stuff all around me. And we're also looking at, you and I are having something that feels like a Zoom meeting, except it's borrowing ideas from Hiroshi Ishii's Clearboard, from 34 years ago, where the data that we're looking at is in the same place on the screen for both of us. So I'm seeing your video, but also I'm tracking your hands and and we're just using MediaPipe for that. And I can pick things and move them. And so we're doing these two parallel paths where I'm talking and there's an AI helping me and I'm gesturing and maybe there's text and maybe there's objects and it's just video on this computer screen. And also we're saying, hey, I'm walking around in a room and I'm wearing a headset and you and I are working on something together in a more sci-fi kind of way. And we're trying really hard as much as we can to use literally the same software in both of those. There's a gesture there, there's a meaning, and so speaking to what Peter was saying, we're trying to actually find the bridge from the human perspective of if you and I are talking over video, or if you and I are talking in the future where we have those glasses that don't quite exist yet but will soon, what's going to be the commonality there? Because it's really a design for humans question, more in my view than it is a software question.
Well, that is really cool. And I find myself reversing because of who's in the room today. So very much during the Sloan time, I was kind of fighting this corner of, different access to data in different ways and experiences and as much commonality of the interactions as possible. But also, I'm a photographer and a videographer. I'm basically an artist by birth and earlier education. So I look at media in very specific ways. I can spend days talking about a specific lens and all of that stuff. The thing is, I do a lot more photography now rather than videography, even though most of the work is viewed digitally, which you have to have, in order to have a movie, you have to have a dynamic medium, right? And the difference between a picture and a movie is, as McLuhan said, it's 24 frames a second, right? So when we look at this, I'm inclined to, for the sake of our experiences, completely disagree with you in a fun way and say that what are the experiences that can only happen in a spatial environment? That can be stored and scratched at the surface when you go 2D. But how can it be liberated, right? It's a very, very difficult question because we've asked it a lot over the last 2 years, and we kind of go in circles around it. But something as simple as the example of, first of all, context versus new thing. I find that incredibly useful. Because, for instance, all of you, why would I want to redefine who you are for every gosh darn meeting, right? I want to be able to write who you are, the right keywords, all of that. That's context. But when it comes to all the brilliant things you have said, should that maybe be a linear column in the middle, right? And if so, when you select something, what happens? We just have lines. That's not very exciting. That could be mocked up in 2D. What are your thoughts of throwing away any relationship with 2D world and with what I call framed text? What could be actually useful that you just have to get in the headset, just as you can't watch a movie one image at a time? The WIMP question, Peter, is extremely important. And I think we need to have as many as possible. That's basically most of my work, to have a diverse set of interactions, lots of different styles. I'm really scared that some companies' gestures or actions will too quickly ossify and we're stuck with a GUI type thing and spacey.
I worry about getting patented or copyrighted. And, you can't do click shift raise your hand. I mean, stupid things like that. That happened in the early window interfaces back before Windows. People tried to copyright. Oh, you can't do this. Or my Wang word processor does it a certain way. You can't do this in a PC application the way Wang did it.
Yeah.
Lotus 1-2-3. You can't do a spreadsheet the way they fought each other. VisiCalc and all. There's all that. We're at that stage where we're developing what is a spreadsheet. What I think that even today, after 40 years of this, I mean, I remember this stuff from college back in the 80s. We're still nascent at getting. Here's the way you do like href, link, Windows icon, mouse pointer kind of interface that's grown into this standard. There's nothing in the 3D world that is equivalent to say, I know how to go into your headset and my knowledge base and still navigate without having to learn a whole new set of game controls. It's like going to Warcraft versus Call of Duty. You're learning this whole world, and it's only within that world, and it's to their advantage to lock you in there to say you can't use those same gestures in the other game. You got to pay us money and do tutorials and stuff.
Yeah, it should definitely be open. I don't mind people learning game interactions, but it's got to be open to carry to different places. Tom and Ken?
Yeah, so I would remind Peter that going back a little further than the 80s, that Xerox's stuff that Alan was working on didn't have apps. It had tasks essentially. And one of the things I think is happening with the AI world is, again, with things like vibe coding, which is only going to get better, that we're no longer going to be forced to conform to apps that, again, are that medium, that lowest common denominator apps, which I think frustrate the heck out of a lot of people, because there's like, this is not how I work. This is not what I need to do. I want to work it this way, and you make an environment that's specifically around your proclivities, and that includes your information environment. And the key thing there, I think, and that I've really noticed a lot in working with AI lately, is there's two ways in which you have to shift your perspective. It's really easy to get tunnel vision. So you have to be able to, again, zoom in and out on the information. So you want to see sometimes a very specific part of the puzzle, and sometimes you want to see the whole puzzle. Right. And so being able to zoom in and out of things, but also, and this is another one that I think a lot of people are starting to realize, the speed up and slow down. There are times when you could, it's really easy to get on the AI horse and have it drag you through the streets. And I might have to copyright that metaphor. Peter liked it. But but it's that's one of the problems with AI, is that since it does solve a lot of those low hanging problems that used to slow you down because you couldn't figure out how to rearrange your desk or do this one little part of the puzzle, that you don't have to do that. And so instead you're forced on decision making at a higher level. When you're coding, you're not worrying about the technicalities of this line working with this line. You're worried about how does this program work together as a structure and things like that. And so those are more logic types of questions and higher level stuff. So, one thing I think that we should, anticipate is, again, to be able to speed up and slow down, but also zoom in and zoom out. One of the things I've been thinking about in terms of photography lately, because I've been struggling to find the time for it, to be honest, is that's one of my key slowdown activities. I mean, that's one of my, okay, I'm going to hit the brakes, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna look at the world carefully, and not rush through and so on and so forth. And I think I need to set up some very deliberate times where I'm just going to go, okay, I'm going to hit the brakes because my brain hurts. Another Monty Python reference, but yeah. Um, so that was just sort of my thinking on terms of that. So yes, think about beyond apps. You're right about the killer app. I mean, what can you do in 3D or in XR that you couldn't do in the real world or in on a two-dimensional environment? I still remember everybody was into Second Life years and years ago, and apparently still around. But it's like, oh well, this is so cool and everything, and people would hold conferences and half the time, I mean, it was nice because it broke down barriers. It was pre-Zoom, so we were able to get together in ways that didn't involve a lot of travel, and that was great. But people would just show the same old PowerPoint presentations in Second Life, and I'm like, well, this is a low grade version of what we would have had in a conference, right? So why is this any better? But my friend Jim Groom did a presentation one time, which he basically got on, and everybody was going into learning management systems and Blackboard and stuff, and he said, "You guys are all a bunch of zombies just following into this." And he said, "You know what we do with zombies?" And he whipped out a flamethrower and set the audience on fire. And that was a moment where I sort of went, now we've done something in Second Life which would get you locked up in the real world. But just where's that thing? Where's that killer app? Where's that? And I think we're still flailing around for that a bit. So
Yeah, I mean, the killer app, I think, is also a bit of an expression because, we're not in a position where we can reinvent the ecosystem fully. And part of the big problem with people not being nice all the time is there are so many security restrictions. If you're doing something in WebXR, there are huge barriers to what you can open, which is what we struggled with a lot last year. You can't just import data from here and there and move stuff around. It's really complicated because it's based in a web browser. And also developing native, author is not allowed to open a file without the user explicitly going through the open dialog. So and this is partly why I'm looking at the issues of quotes in this world. Because if you have a quote, do you want to have the whole original source document, if you can legally have it, in the quote so you can unfold it? Or do you want to keep it at a distance so that you have to leave the environment and all of those things? It's a real thing. But I just want to speak up a little bit on the actual design. The vibe coding is great, and there's a lot of stuff I've seen. All of these things are fantastic, but when it comes to the human experience, and I know this is not necessarily a shared passion, but for me, where you have an item in a menu, whether you have a menu, the way it's ordered, where is it related to other things, are really, really important things because it becomes kind of your way to reach in. And that's something that really has to be polished by use over time, which is partly what I'm trying to do. And I wish the app was live so you guys could play with it. Right, Ken.
I know it's been a while now, but I'm going to respond to what Peter said. So if we sort of wind back for the last 10 minutes, um, the, there is a one big fundamental difference that is between 2D and 3D that we have to pay attention to, even whether we think it's rubber fair or whatever, which is that everybody spends a big chunk of their day interfacing with 2D interfaces. There's maybe 100 people in this country, maybe, I'm not even sure it's that much, using VR. And almost all of them are just using the Quest 3 and somebody bought it for them and it's in their closet, so they're not even using it. So there is an actual market, a mass market. There's consumers, there's businesses, there's the government, taxes. There's all kinds of things going on in 2D. That's hundreds of millions of people in this country alone and billions of people around the world. And so there is this enormous pressure for there to be consistent standards. Um, VR is still, it's still like hi-fi in the 1950s, a particular, weird elite is really interested in this thing, but it's not going to drive a standard because that's not how markets work. So none of that is really about is 2D good, 2D bad. It's more like we're still in early days. We haven't hit the XR singularity where this thing gets replaced by a phone. When that happens, there will be standards because there will be a market. So I just needed to point that out because that's just really what's going on.
No argument with any of that, except the other side of it, while agreeing with that, is if we look back at movie theaters, and I know we mostly agree, obviously, Ken, but you wouldn't say we shouldn't have a movie theater because up until then people could only view pictures and books, right? So a movie theater is like VR. It is a special thing one has to have access to in order to have the experience. And it maps only to a certain level back. Now, I am being a devil's advocate here because I fully agree that knowledge should be available in as many medium as possible. I'm absolutely against ghettoization. I'm absolutely against special apps owning stuff. All I'm saying is that we should also feel free to invent an experience that's like a movie theater, before they were common, right? What is it? Clearly, there's something to do with, I would say, and please stop me if you disagree, but I would say that, first of all, walking is an important part of it. Sitting at your desk, no. Right? We did that for a lot of this loan. Having something around you, no. Because all of those things can be mimicked by screens, having very large screens. And we know how cheap they've become now. They're in shopping centers all over the place. But when you can go up and you go into the information, and one of the things that's kind of magical, and when it's behind you, it's really, really cool. It's like, I don't want that now, but I don't want to hide it. I put it behind me. And as I walk around, it's available there. What are the really cool things? Because the lines that connect things is cute, but but until you do the focus, that's funny. This is the first time it's ever happened to me. I tapped to do the focus, but I'm not in VR, so that was really weird. It's almost like scrolling on a piece of paper. First time it's happened. So Peter, I agree with you. VisiCalc WordPerfect HyperCard. I agree with you. I'm not saying that either. Right. So why don't we? Maybe this is where you're going. Why don't we think about? I mean, HyperCard was a revelation, both by itself and the impact. Is that something you want to talk about? I would love to talk about HyperCard in VR, for instance.
Yeah, I think there's research. Oh, you roll my hand. There's old ancient research from back again when Apple was first doing it, and before Steve Jobs came in and kind of put a kibosh on a lot of things that were going on at the time that I think would have changed the information architecture today, quite frankly. And hey, it's well, HyperCard was, I don't know, people in the know were like super excited about it, but you had to have a Mac, and so you had to be in that Apple space of for doing HyperCard. But once you were there, it was a lot of cognoscenti were playing with it and saying, well, how do I get this, do something similar? And no one really did the equivalent of HyperCard outside of it. I was surprised. We built things in Smalltalk and whatnot that were laying out of things and doing some hyperlinking and stuff, but it all got kind of munged into weird things. I mean, I could talk about my experience with Visual Age, which is a programming environment that did 2D, but it was doing and basically created visual spaghetti. I mean, it was an interesting tool for its time, but didn't go anywhere I thought it would go. And I'm curious as to see. I put those 3 killer apps out there. I don't see any of them. The visceral thing that says this is the way to do calculations in a spreadsheet. This is the way to write documents. kind of like a Wang word processor, which is a dedicated hardware over the time, but to do it anywhere I want. I mean, Google Docs is now probably the, Microsoft Word kind of thing. That's just a tool that everyone knows and uses. Um,
Ken, just a
Ken's
brief
up.
second. I just wanted to highlight, Peter, again, focus on specific. So I just wrote in the chat here, this is the way to ... That's a really wonderful way of thinking of it. Thank you. Ken, please go ahead.
Lives on in every software that you use that tries to do that. I mean, I started with VisiCalc, and I see that they're all basically trying to do VisiCalc. That paradigm is still here. It hasn't gone away. It's just and WordPerfect lives on. I mean, first Word and then Google Docs. What got started is being evolved. And also, one of the things that I noticed back in the mid 80s about HyperCard. And back then, you could actually have long conversations with all the people who worked on it. Again, before it was considered not commercial by Steve Jobs, is that by the time you saw HyperCard, Apple had put enormous resources into making lots and lots of content that was specifically focused on making it a useful educational tool. So it looked deceptive, but a lot had been sunk into it to make it easy to use. And that came out of a particular philosophy that Apple had back in the mid 80s. And so, and in fact, and they didn't advertise that. They didn't, and we put all this stuff in. You just felt like, wow, it's just so easy. Because that investment that they had made in that purpose, because that was their philosophy at the time.
Can you guys, for the sake of inspiration, mention 2 or 3 things that either you did or someone did that was really special in HyperCard, like specific things that were done in it?
Well, to me, the important thing about HyperCard was the fact that students could just pick it up and start creating things and linking things together. And remember, this is well before there was a web browser. So that could make linked presentations and multimedia and do all those things, and made it easy for you to have that experience as an author. So for an entire generation of children, this was a game changer in the way they thought about things. And I'm sure a number of those kids that knowledge in their head and start making other things technologically. So I think it was enormously important in terms of how it changed the way it looked at this you present things.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Because the thing that is so incredibly easy in XR, at least in the vision and all of that, is just moving stuff about and opening and closing things, and then saying what they should do. To do some kind of a slideshow in there where you have, things flying into view and then going the next one, like huge configurations might be an interesting visual aid. So you have a way to put things wherever, but then a command to say next, and they have a defined area where they go to. You interact with it, and then it goes back in another one. I don't know how unique that is. It is the structure, it is the space itself. And Peter, you are sitting in front of a savanna. When humans left mostly being in trees and started walking on the savanna, a lot of things changed for us physiologically and mentally, right? First of all, we needed to be able to look higher because the grass was quite high. We needed to look for predators. It changed us. What are the stances of being in a knowledge environment that is fully spatial?
That's the question. We're stepping out in the savannah as hunters. I'm going to write some text. I'm thinking in terms of visual meta. I'm going to kind of constrain myself to say, okay, what would I want to see author do? Right? And actually, I haven't actually run author because I don't have a Mac anymore. So it's like I just see you talk about it and see you show it off. Um, so I'm kind of at a disadvantage, but I kind of see what's going on. I'm thinking XYZ, putting things at particular points in a space in a document. Yeah, that's like placing your paragraphs in the right spot. But I think you're going to have a little more flexible layout moniker that isn't just XYZ. It says, well, put these glossary references in this order in a list. And it may be a vertical stack panel kind of a list. You may flay it out in like an array or a sphere and spread them out like a cards on a table or something like that. But the fundamental thing you would store in is I want you to show it as a flayed out set of cards or as a stack or as a list of things like at the end of a document when you have the glossary and they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm thinking the XYZ is more about, oh, I want to tie this, I want to make this pop up close when you hover over this text that's got a little, a red highlight, something about it. You want to hover over it like you do at hyperlink and have a hover up and say, oh, well, this thing pops out to the side and says, well, this is the thing I want you to notice about this one thing. So the XYZ, I think, is kind of a degenerate form of that. Yeah, it'll work and you can do it. And it gives you kind of a, it's like, here's the painting with all the dots connected and it's kind of fixed with the author. I think you can make a little more flexible layout of saying, well, I want to tie this close to there. Closeness depends if you're in a VR headset versus if you're on a desktop. You'd put it up on a different page or you do a hover window or something like that. But what you're specifying is the information architecture of saying, I want this close to that. And I'll give Tom his hand up.
I just want to briefly say, I think it might be useful for us to have a session at some point in the future where we really just strip down everything. I think we get lost again with the paper metaphor, but I'm not sure what replaces it. As I talked about in my talk in London, one of the biggest problems with paradigm shifts is that what the old paradigm looks like. There are things about it that really don't work in the new environment, but you don't know what the next one's going to look like. So so part of our struggle is figuring out what that next paradigm starts to look like. And we may not, we don't have to invent it whole cloth, but start sketching it out in terms of how XR changes that information environment and how AI does too. And I think that's might be a fun exercise for us to do to say, okay, well, we're really not exchanging papers here. We're exchanging ideas. We're exchanging pathways to other ideas. We're exchanging. I mean, what exactly are we supposed to be? What exactly are we doing? Being really reductionist in terms of what exactly are we doing, and then build back up again and say, okay, is paper the only way to do this? Is the paper metaphor the only way to do this? Is there another way? Et cetera, et cetera. I think that might be useful. And I don't want to provide the answers because I don't have them. Since Frodo can't see you, I'm guessing I can hand the
Oh, I
mic
see.
to Ken.
Okay, so then I'm just gonna start talking, and then he can start talking when he starts talking. Responding to what Peter said, which I agree with, the thing about 3D is that XYZ, as he I think very nicely said, is not what 3D space is about. I'm looking at my room right now, and there is a table and a chair, and there's a window with some snow outside, and there's a piano, and there is a bookshelf, and there's some books on the bookshelf, and I'm not organizing 3D according to some sort of abstract notion of XYZ coordinates. I'm organizing it in terms of how I walk around in the world and how, our brain evolved to connect with what our body can do, and our body evolved to connect with what our brain can do. So whatever we end up doing, it's going to be contingent on whatever lived space we're thinking out for our information. I completely agree. It's not going to be about coordinates. It's going to be about something at a higher and much more connecting semantic presumably Frode can hear us, so he might jump in at some point and say something, unless he doesn't know that does he know, is he muted? He doesn't know he's muted.
Everyone is muted.
He's probably hearing us. I don't think he can speak when he's away from the laptop. Yeah, okay, that's it. So
Oh,
he's
I
hearing us.
see. Oh, he can hear us.
The microphone's
Okay.
in the laptop, not in the headset. I think that's my guess is what's going on.
Yeah. Presumably he can hear us,
He gave a
but
thumbs
he's
up, I
still
thought.
muted.
Yeah. We're not hearing you, Rhoda. By the way, I love you showing us what you're doing with it because not playing with the headset directly. I mean, maybe when I'm in Hawaii, I'll have some time to do it. But
I'm going to go back in. I'm sorry. I entered while. Okay, you can hear me and see my computer desktop, right?
yep.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Now we can.
Yeah, sorry about that. Obviously, I heard everything you said, so that's good. Yeah, no, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the emotion of this. So, come on, recenter to here. There you go. I'm in a meeting, Don, and I can all see you. Say hi.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. I'll talk to you after, Dylan.
Ready?
Yeah. After.
There's the important object in the environment.
There you go. They can't see you. I'm showing this. Okay.
Let me see what you're showing.
So, okay, let me just go to documents. So here you go. So this is what it starts out with as, don't touch please, you may stop sharing. So it starts out completely flat, going to some of the points that have just been made. So we can choose what to select, which is really, really important, right? So I'm now going to, this is when the magic happens. It really is the spatiality. Let's say I put the people over here, and then I do now deselect, right? It's a different workspace. Now I can more easily deal with these quotes. So what you guys have been saying, it's like, okay, so that was Beanie, move that over here, and so on. So yes, it is, no one cares about the XYZ, fully agree with you guys. That's just an internal thing, like a page layout thing, right? And over here we have the people. Currently there's nothing on the back, which we may or may not want to do. But there is the question of what actually is special about this, especially in the Apple Vision Pro, because visually it's just incredible quality. It is not noticeably worse than having a laptop in front of you. But this is a mess, obviously. So we have to look at things like this. So now focus. I've got Symposium 25, that's where we're set, and this will obviously be Ken. Select Ken, and now I can see all kinds of things. So I'm going to unfocus, and I'm going to refocus, because that didn't happen automatically. So explorations like this are really kind of cool, but presenter 25 and current participant and all of that is very different from the statements that Ken have made, right? So how do we get to grips with that? I mean, this could be a whole document, couldn't it? So I'm just trying to sell the obvious thing of, it feels different when we're in it. And this very crude little control thing here, it is actually quite useful. So, I select this and then I just select similar, and it tries to break the whole system. Almost done. Going to just show all. And then a really important thing is this. This is not interesting, so deselect. So I select one thing. So if this is not interesting, I should be able to hide it. Boom, gone, right? Oh, this is really interesting, but not that interesting. This I like. So we start doing that kind of editing. So now I can choose to show Only what is liked. That's it. So thank you for indulging that long demo, and I wonder if you guys are still here.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, my point really is flitting about like that is different. So, I was lucky I had Jim this morning with my trainer who was on Zoom most of the time, and she was talking about physically the importance of freedom of physical movement. And I was mentioning that what we do is freedom of mental movement. Right? So to be able to have that kind of freedom of entering the information, hiding and showing quickly, I'm wondering if we can go further with that.
So I have a related question then, based on what you just showed. Given the kind of content that you showed, is there, back to your original question, if I had lots of monitors all around, like as much screen space as I wanted, high resolution monitors, blah, blah, blah. Is there anything that you just showed that I couldn't already do with 2D paradigms that way?
Yes, there is. And thank you for that very leading question, Ken. There is, and of course we need to step further, but the initial thing I would say is putting stuff behind me is one thing, just boom, and chunking in a specific location and space. Our brains are very three-dimensional anyway. And this session I did with Dave Millard, where he talked about the original plane having meaning, putting it behind that and maybe making it fade is very different from having a 2D screen where something is a bit faded, right? The parallax is very, very important. But I think, Ken, a lot more brain power needs to be invested in trying to address that question.
I would actually say more specifically, not just more brain power. I would say what you just did was create a hypothesis for a research study. And I say research study because the answer doesn't lie in computers, it lies in human psychology. If I present, the person off the street with, on the one hand, put on this headset and you can throw stuff behind you and it fades in 3D. And on the other side, here's a nice big monitor and here's stuff that looks like it's faded, but you can interact with that. Would I find that there is an inherent difference to that person? And I'm not saying the answer is yes or the answer is no. I'm saying the answer is found in people, not in the technology. And we would actually need to build those things and do a fair comparison to know whether what you asserted is actually the right direction in the long run.
Eminently reasonable and correct. In my dialogue with the organization we've discussed, with the new contact, I expect a meeting next week or the week after. He came out of surgery, so he's not super jumping back. That is exactly the kind of research project we should look at, because it also helps push the side of XR spatial, but it pushes it in a way that is measurable. I mean, it's not science, it's psychology, as you said. We're not trying to understand the state of the world. So it's fine to go into this with a very, very loaded mindset, as long as that is honestly made clear, and see if that can be liberated into space. I asked Claude earlier today to unleash the power of text. What should be done? Most of it was help people with search, stuff like that. It's like, yes, I know. And then it came down more to organize information. It's like, okay, now you're getting somewhere. And one of the limitations of this environment is the interaction and psychology of nesting. I have an interaction in 2D called contracting on the Mac, where you select stuff and then you hide it in a node. which you can expand. If you do that in XR, I could see it could be very positive, powerful. But if you have a node here of, let's say 20, 25 meetings, and you open that and everything else goes away, just a little question of how do you then go back? And are these environments aware of each other? Do lines happen and stuff? That becomes very interesting. I'm just reading what Astral wrote here. Yeah, no, absolutely. Would you mind saying that, Astral, for the record? Even though the chat is also record.
Sure. Just is my mic coming through good? There's an extra tricky element to the study that Ken proposed. Is that we're changed by the environment that we're in. So we're going to be designing for a moving target.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope it can
I also wanted to affirm that when I work with cognitive psychologists in joint projects, they generally frustrate my computer science graduate students because my computer science graduate students want to make everything as good as possible. And what the cognitive scientists, and this speaks to Astral's point, which I agree with, say is no, 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 you're not trying to make the most amazing experience. You're trying to answer a question, which means you actually have to take out features and simplify things and remove things which would make it more fun or more interesting for your test subjects. So we need to sort of put aside our I can totally knock your socks off hat when we are asking questions like the question that I was proposing. Difficult it is for many people who build things to put that aside.
I definitely feel like one of your students, and I have to admit though, what I would like to see and study is, I mentioned several times earlier, Liquid, the tool, hang on, I think I have it up on screen for reference. And what happens when people who use Liquid get on a computer that doesn't have it, they feel very, very frustrated. Where is it? Here. So this is what it looks like. You select text, it jumps up, and then within half a second of using no brain power, because you've learned it over a few times, let me see if I can show you.
First, let me show you what Liquid I...
Right, so here it is, boom, you get a result, right? Translation, whatever it is. And here translated in situ. That's because of Vint. Google got really mad at me. Every couple of years they send me an email, cease and desist, and saying I actually have permission to use their services in such a way because it's a computational search, which they don't allow, right? Anyway, all those things. The reason I'm mentioning now is if we could develop an interaction in a system in XR that provided a similar kind of frustration when people don't have it, that would be the killer app. Like people saying, I don't want to work on this 2D screen, it's just too limiting. That would be amazing. And we haven't figured out what it is. I mean, spreadsheets, in retrospect, is obvious, but what are spreadsheets in space? HyperCard, also in retrospect, obvious. Computational little end pieces put together, cards that can do amazing stuff and link to each other. So we have 7 minutes left. Let's just solve it, shall we?
I just want to say I don't think it's going to happen because people are going to be wearing what I'm wearing. It's going to happen because people are wearing what the three of you are wearing. And that until then, I don't think there's anything you could say to people that's going to fundamentally change.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's the reason I use the Apple Vision Pro, because it's the closest now in terms of quality, not in terms of experience. It's heavy, it's bulky, it's ridiculous. I mean, it feels to me like the original Mac in that sense. Absolutely, it will be glasses.
Yeah, I actually meant form factor, not. I mean, I don't have any problem at all with the MetaQuest 3's functionality, even though it's not the Apple. I find it incredibly useful, but the form factor is a complete showstopper for almost everybody.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. I agree with you. I mean, Deanie complained about her hair. If she puts it on in the morning, she has meetings. It's all messed up. Same with me. Normal guy, normal hair. Well, it's a bit glued up today. It's absolutely annoying. So 100% agreeing with you, Ken. The way it is now is a research tool, and I really think we need to look at it as one day it will be glasses. Before that, it won't be. Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of interesting stuff to do in VR where you're in a fully immersive environment, but I don't think a lot of people will have literal room for that. We'll have desks and things in the space. So AR is the way to go. Tim Cook said it a few years ago as well. I'm on board with that. We still need to figure out ways to, when we get this silver bullet or killer app or whatever, and Peter's done certain things in space, he needs an easy way to send it to the rest of us. I think that part of it is so important. Peter, please.
Yeah, I was playing around with some of the ARX, or just doing random stuff to see what's possible. And the interesting thing is, you're walking around like that. I mentioned bringing my the network of nodes up in my browser on my phone, or the ARXR support in the phones. I could walk around similarly, but I have to hold the phone out in front of me as my reading slate to see what's going on. But I can, it's like, the furniture apps that let you see the furniture in your room and stuff like that. There's a physical aspect to it that's really interesting. But my office, I'm going to trip over everything in my office doing that. So there's a kind of a scrolling aspect that still I want to have to say, take that whiteboard, move it to me, not have me walk over to it. Although the walking is good because you say the physicality of wandering around your data is fantastic. Have you ever done a cave, a proper, University of Illinois, the big 3D immersive environments? Mm-hmm. It's insane what the feeling it gives you when you do that. I've done that only a couple of times in my life, and it was just, okay, this is great, but I'm not going to have one of those. But figuring out how to kind of make a zoomy kind of way of doing it, because I think walking around it becomes inefficient and dangerous, quite frankly.
I think walking around is actually the key, but it has to be so you can see your space.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You don't want to step on the cat.
No, exactly.
So I have another suggestion. I've been getting really into the whole question of diegetic prototyping. I don't know if that's come up here in this conversation. The idea that diegetic means in the world of. So, for example, if you hear music in a movie and it's because the band in the movie is playing, that's diegetic because that's in the story, that's in the world. I've been looking around, and there's no time today, but we should think about this. I've been looking around at examples of how technology is used in fiction to establish the nature of the world, and that is what some people call diegetic prototyping. There's a whole little field of that. So when Tony Stark is having his conversations with Jarvis, or when John Wick is kind of going like this and there's all kinds of amazing stuff happening, or in some movies or TV shows, somebody's just wearing their glasses and everybody is labeled, and et cetera, et cetera. These are people thinking through, and in my mind, they're not just thinking through this is mixed reality. They're thinking through what will be the AI that you don't even notice that's behind the scenes that's actually making that useful. So they're implicitly talking, I mean, in the case of Jarvis, they're explicitly talking about an AI. But in the case of all of these, they're talking about spatial arrangement is happening not because John Wick did this, but because John Wick did this, or, John Anderton did this in the Minority Report. And the interface said, oh, okay, I know what you mean. I'm going to do something intelligent in response. So I think we should be looking at those things because people put a lot of thought into those design fictions.
I think that's really important. Thank you for highlighting that, Ken. When it comes to the real world, one of my dreams is to do the Forum in Rome, but not only for the building. So you can, literally swipe through the ages and you see the ruins change, but also people walking about. Replace them with people wearing togas. right? So you don't bump into them, but you don't have to see modern people, right? So that would have to be a very LLM-based system of finding and clothing and all of that. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I think one of my problems is that because I'm developing this, it's buggy. And whenever you have a bug, it really reduces the threshold of enjoyment, or rather, whatever, it makes it much less enjoyable. So when I start working on something, and then suddenly there are lines in space pointing to nothing, of course that's a bug that's fixable, but it also means that the joy of just playing with it evaporates for a minute, right? Which is to say that there is a lot of potential. Anyway, I hope you guys will be here on Monday. We're going to talk about a very explicit thing of hosting a conference in XR. So we have specific labels for days. We have, it's like, it'll be a timeline, very simple, very obvious. Now, where do you bring the papers for those things, and how do you add things that are of that day, like videos? How do you connect them? How do you navigate the knowledge? Peter, yes.
Have you seen? I put a link to it. GatherTown, or those 2D things. I've actually participated in a couple of conferences which kind of have this 2D with some audio and video, but it's like 8-bit graphics, Nintendo kind of like interface. But the way they cluster the rooms, the way you can wander into a room and then the interaction pops up with, audio, video, and you walk out of the room, just like walking around a conference. They kind of structured it that way. Doing that in 3D, I don't know if you've seen that or experienced that. It might be good to say, well, let's just do that in 3D, and you'll have a wonderful experience, because it's like a conference, like wandering into a paper or into a thing. And they did their poster sessions that way, where the authors would sit in the room and talk to you about the paper if you wandered in, and you go see a cluster of little avatars in a particular room. There's like a presentation going on. She's talking to lots of people about her doc. You pop by there to see what's interesting and get their, the human interaction as they're talking about the docs and people are asking questions. And so you'd have this flow of dots around this little map of all the papers that were going on. And some would have one poor person sitting there twiddling their thumbs, waiting for someone to visit, like you do at a booth, just like at a real conference. But it worked out pretty well in that people could do that without having to physically be at that conference.
That's really cool. Thank you for that link, Peter. I found it and clicked on it.
So to explore that, it's a 3D version of that would work really well, because it'd be very familiar to people who do conferences as having, a room for your paper and stuff like that.
Yeah, the issue there with the current way of looking at it is we're doing AR, so you will see the background real room. I'm trying not to work with fully VR simply for the navigation issues. But we were in Oslo yesterday. On the way home, we went to the Munch Museum.
I have to go. I have another meeting.
See you later, Ken. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. But I was just going to mention briefly, there was the Munch Museum, Edward Munch, the Scream, all of that stuff. Interesting building. One of the floors was all about this really dark room with lots of black painted furniture and, almost rooms, just lines, physical stuff, to give an idea of some of the items around his life. So the idea of making fake spaces to help people orient is definitely a good one, Peter, whether it's 2D or 3D and so on. But yeah, that's interesting.
I kind of see the 3D as being sugarcoating the information architecture. When I experienced it in 2D with this GatherTown kind of stuff, it was like, wow, this actually works pretty darn well. I don't need the glasses. I don't need the headset. I don't need the 3D-ness of it that Second Life had. The Second Life 3D stuff was a gimmick. You needed this kind of conference organizing thing that was a lot easier to surf the map to go to where I want versus have to fly to the other world or fly to an island in Second Life. That was kind of bogus. I think this is just like, oh, I'm navigating a little 2D, Super Mario kind of environment that is much more familiar and easier to navigate, and, more people can participate than just the people with goggles.
Makes sense. And we're over, and I'm very, very grateful for you guys being here today. I hope you can be here on Monday week, and we'll see how that goes. So have a good week, everyone.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Stay warm.
Bye.